Welcome back to the Big Dharma podcast. Today I am with Dr. Olivia, who I'm really excited to introduce you to. She has a very unique perspective that resonates with me deeply in regards to health, longevity, and dealing with complex chronic illness, which I think most people who follow me know that that's been my journey. And I wish I would have met Dr. Olivia 20 years ago when I was first embarking on my healing and transformation, because she really speaks to my soul when it comes to understanding what it takes to be in your power. So I'm excited for you guys to all meet her and to understand her perspective, which is one of psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology, which I think is something that everybody should have a baseline understanding of. And the interesting thing is the science has been around for like almost 100 years in the literature, but very few physicians and very few people have heard this expression. So I'm really excited to share all about what that means with you guys and how you can live that so that you can be as healthy as possible. So welcome, Dr. Olivia. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Sheryl. I know we've been trying to connect for ages, and I'm really glad that this is actually coming to fruition.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Every time I see a clip of you, a reel or anything, I'm like, God, she just speaks so much truth. And I can't wait to drop in and just have like a really cool, like heart to heart about, health and life and your evolving perspective and what you're learning and studying. Cause I know you also focus a lot on innovation, which I think is really important to talk about too. I think on my podcast and in my world, I have spoken quite a bit about the problems in healthcare and, corruption and all kinds of things like that, which I think we can all acknowledge. But I do like to focus on the solution, on, what's the future? What do we do from here? So I hope that we get into some of that today. But I think maybe it's a good place to start to just share a little bit about your background as a physician. And I think what I would love to know as you frame that up is like, when was the moment that you first realized that you can't look at any one system in isolation and that there's this interconnection with all things?
Yeah. So exactly what you were saying before when you introduced everything, it's the study of endo, immuno, neuro, um, and actually it's many other things on top of that. It's your epigenetics, the sociology, your behaviors, you just but the word would just be too long. And in fact, actually, this is a true story. Um, it used to be called psychoendoneuroimmunology. The only
Hmm.
problem, if you're a PENI specialist, that's a penis. So hence
Yeah.
we now say psychoneuroimmunology. And all that is the bidirectionality and interconnectedness of psychology, emotions, behaviors, nervous system, immunology, and hormones, endocrinology. And we all know that there is an interconnectedness. Everything affects everything. We know this. All doctors know this. All patients know this because you know that if you have a night of bad sleep, it's going to affect your neurocognition the next day. You know, if your immune system is a little bit frazzled because you just came out of the flu, that it's going to affect your behaviors, your moods. You know that if you have a particular mindset about something, it drives your behaviors. So it just allows physicians more levers to pull when we're trying to figure out how to help a patient out of their very real physiological holes. And it doesn't always have to be a drug or a supplement or even a modality. Sometimes it's about mindset. Sometimes it's about just being heard. When we're going through medical school, they do tell us, right? They say, the interactions you have with your patients are sometimes more powerful than the prescriptions you give them. Listening is a skill that needs to be honed in the clinic because if you don't ask the right questions, if you don't develop the right rapport with a patient, you're never going to tease out of their history that piece of information that could change everything. For me, it was a journey to get to where I am. For me, when I first started to get an inkling that this is where my practice was going to go, is because I am naturally someone who's very curious and I like speaking to my patients. And you can physically see someone's sympathetic nervous system switch into a parasympathetic state when you ask the right questions, when they're divulging some things about, their home life or their emotional state. And we know that you can't heal when you're in a sympathetic state. You have to be in a parasympathetic state to heal. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 42 years old, and she passed away when she was 45. And in my father and her desperate bid to get better, they went down all sorts of rabbit holes, conventional as well as non conventional, and that included emotional healing. The church, my parents were very religious, the church and the support there was also very important to them. And to see how these things play out at home and in her physicality made a real indelible mark on me as well. And then, of course, as you're going through um, your work as a doctor and you really see the interplay between all these soft sciences and how much of an impact it can have on the hard sciences, you stop talking about hard and soft because, all that means is that we just don't have the right assays, the right tests for these things
Yeah.
yet to be able to, write papers and do systematic reviews and all that. That's all it is. Because as you said, it has been in the literature in some way, shape, or form for a very, very, very long time. And because so much of the psychoneuroimmunology literature that really kind of pulls it together has been in the realm of psychology, which of course is beneath doctors and therefore
Yeah.
is not
Yeah.
taught in medical school, we miss a trick, big style. So I'm very glad
Mm.
to say that there are plenty more people here in this day and age interested in that interconnectedness, yourself included. You have a great platform, you're talking about it, you're getting the word out. um, it's just it's just so profound, the change that it can bring about when you realize how many levers you have and how impactful some of these things can be. And the impactful stuff like the mindset, the emotions, the psychology, and even the spirituality, if we dare say,
Yeah.
those things are free and they are in the hands
I
of
know.
patients. Mm.
I know. They're
Yeah.
free and they're enjoyable. That's the thing that I feel like it's the application of whatever you want to call it science, whether it's quantum biology or, these soft science. The application is actually quite like lovely. It's delightful to
Yeah.
watch a sunrise,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's delightful
Exactly.
to stretch. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
stretching
Yeah.
just like inherently feels good. It's like somehow the divine or the universe creator God, whatever you want to call it, made these things feel good for a reason. Like we should be
Mhm.
leaning into the things that feel good. But what I'm hearing from you is that it wasn't until like after medical school, when you were in
Oh, yeah.
practice with patients, that you had that realization that it was
Yes.
like, okay, so what I learned isn't exactly how I want to proceed with my practice. And
Yes.
so, how did you then start to explore this specific field of science? Like, how did you discover it?
So I still remember the day when I spoke to a colleague and I said, I feel like I'm practicing some sort of, I don't know, like a psycho, like a neuro, like an immunology thing, like a psychoneuroimmunology. And then I thought, oh, what a brilliant word. I'm going to trademark that. So then
No
I
way.
Googled, yes. Then I
No
Googled it and I
way.
went, oh, people are already studying this. That's
Yeah.
how much
Oh,
it's not taught in medical school, right? And
wow.
so then I dived into it
Yeah.
and I realized how many things I had either worked out in practice, and that's the beauty about medical practice, just like a yoga practice. You are never done. It is a practice and you are ever evolving. So I had worked out quite a few things in practice. Some things I had intuited, just like yoga. And
Yeah.
I just made a concerted effort to stop being so one dimensional. Someone's
Mm.
symptoms aren't equal a medication to quell that symptom as per the algorithm that apparently went from God to the medical council to me, right?
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
why do you have this symptom? What is your body
Mm.
trying to say? If you assume the philosophy that your body has the right intention and may not necessarily come across as being um, helpful, right? But if you assume that it was trying to do something helpful and you take on a different lens, all of a sudden you see diseases in a completely new light. Hence
Yeah.
why I get referred complex chronic condition patients now because I am known to look at things from a different perspective. This is not to say that a conventional perspective is wrong. I'm just saying we have that many levers. Why not use them for patients who just can't seem to get back on track with conventional methods or functional methods for that matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Mhm.
that's a really big distinction because what I see with my personal experience and then people that seek out Japa Health is very often people who have gone down the path first conventional, failed, then functional, and still didn't get the results that they expected. And most often after a lot of money spent in the functional
Yes.
medicine space. Pouring money into like all different kinds of diagnostics, being obsessed with data, and
Oh
actually
my
that's
God.
creating even more
Exactly.
stress.
Right.
And then even,
100%.
the supplements and it's like they're chasing their tail. And it actually, I think, depletes people more. And I've been in that place personally where I got to the point at one part in my journey where I was like, I'm not doing any more tests. Like, no more tests, because all that matters to me, because they were inconsistent with my real lived experience. So I would have a doctor speaking to me and saying, oh, well, this is what I see in your labs, this and that, whatever the story was, because it happened in multiple times, different scenarios. And I would say, but that's not how I'm feeling. That's not
Yeah.
reflective of my reality. Like, that doesn't I didn't feel satisfied. So at
Mm.
one point I just decided, like, I'm not going to do any more tests and I'm going to follow how I feel. And for quite a
Yes.
while, that was what I needed.
Yeah, no. So you are actually the other side of the same coin. You are the patient and your lived experience, and this is what I was experiencing as a doctor as well, because I went from a conventionally trained doctor. I was always a little bit like my father is an integrative medicine veterinarian, actually. So I was always yeah. I went from a open-minded conventional doctor to a lifestyle and integrative curious. Then I became a functional medicine doctor and I thought I'd found my tribe until I realized
Mhm.
after a few years, we are approaching patients in very similar ways where our tests and our therapies are the what were going to set the patients free, i.e., it was external to them. We were doing shit tons of testing, except functional medicine tests are more expensive than
Mhm.
conventional tests. Can they be more insightful? Sure. But, these should come later on when you're at true forks in the road, not as a scattergun approach at the beginning. Instead of drugs, we were giving patients supplements, peptides, herbs, and we thought we were better than conventional medicine doctors because it wasn't pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
But the approach is very similar and certainly not an approach that resonated with me anymore. I sometimes still use the word functional medicine to help patients find me, to help patients kind of understand a little bit more about
Yeah.
what I do, i.e., not conventional. But to be honest with you, I don't like calling myself a functional medicine doctor because I don't identify with that either. And it's very much the experience that you had.
Yeah. I mean, that only came from years of frustration. I think it wasn't necessarily like a brilliant insight. It was more of at the time, I feel like almost it was like I give up on this. Like, it's just not working.
Yeah.
And now when I hindsight, I know why now.
So I was the exact same. I realized after a while because, when you're encouraging patients to do these expensive tests, you're going to hear the protest. Okay. And you can either have the mindset of, well, if you want answers, you're going to have to do this test. Or
Yeah.
you can go, okay, I hear you. It is expensive. Let's MacGyver this. What are we actually getting from this test that we couldn't figure out another way? And is the information that we're gleaning from this test worth how much we paid for it? Because the
Mhm.
insight actually came when I was sort of like everybody else jumping on the gut microbiome bandwagon. Incredible research, very important research. There was a study that came out at the end of 2024 that actually had a group from France take a stool sample from the same patient, same time, right? They took the stool sample and they sent it to 5 different microbiome testing companies, 4 in Europe, 1 in the US. The results were all different, and sometimes the recommendations were contradictory.
Mm.
We're overusing, overselling this microbiome stuff because we don't know enough about it yet. AI and machine learning are definitely going to help, but we're not there yet. Anyway, and I remember at one point, because I was looking for, hang on a second, is this right? Okay, I wasn't just blindly doing it, I was thinking about it. And I remember realizing one day that my advice to patients with regards to their diet didn't change that drastically after a $500 gut microbiome test. It was still eat whole foods in a parasympathetic state, in a circadian rhythm, stay away from seed oils, good fats. If you're going to eat protein, it's grass fed, grass finished, pasture raised, right? Antibiotic, hormone free. I mean, that is that's the crux of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Stay
I
away from
resonate with
anything
that
laden
so
with
much.
glyphosate.
Yeah, I resonate with that so much. Something that I often say when people come to me and they ask me for should I do this, should I do that, should I do this test? I think the best question that I can ask in that scenario is, but what are you going to do about it when you get the results?
Sheryl, are you in my head? Get out of my head.
Like, yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think that just comes from 20 years of the journey, right? Of it's just wisdom. I don't really think that I don't know. I don't think you can teach that. I think you have to live through it and you have to fail over and over again and try over and over again and then have the benefit of hindsight. Okay, well, I would have recommended the same thing whether or not I had that result, you know? And then
Right.
now I know what I know. It's that like if you're stressed out, your blood test, if you go in to get your blood and you're anxious that morning or you just almost got hit by somebody as you were pulling in the parking lot, those experiences are going to change the results of your blood work in that moment. And so I didn't know that then, obviously, but like, you get a stressful phone call or you had a bad night's sleep or whatever. So the results of these tests, whether it's blood or anything else, or even the saliva test, all that stuff, it's just like a snapshot in time. So what I've learned is that when you take a good, honest look at how you're showing up in life, that's the best way to evaluate what your truth is. What your truth is going to show up in your body. And the body doesn't
Yep.
lie. And so I love what you said earlier about how if we reframe what the illness is there to show us, because I think in society, we're so conditioned to believe that it's like this bad thing that we have to like stop it, numb it, escape it, turn it off, fix it. And what I have learned is like that for me, when I had my spiritual awakening, was okay, this is actually a sign like from my soul that what I'm doing in my life isn't working for me.
Mm. Mhm. Yep, exactly. And half the medications that we give patients are to numb them enough so that they don't protest as much on the wrong road. And it's just
Yeah.
so, what you were just saying. So, in a medical speak term, I always say to my patients, how will it change management? So,
Yeah.
you wanna do this scan. It doesn't matter if the scan is $50 or it's $500. How is it going to truly change management? Because we've already
Mhm.
excluded, that it was a break, that it was anything that you need to fix surgically. That's
Yeah.
why even in the conventional literature it says, don't scan back pain, for example, right? Very very rarely is it going to mean, oh, now we have to do this surgery or now we have to do this intervention. A lot of time it's supportive care, it's this, it's that. physiotherapy. I mean, you and I probably do things slightly differently from just physiotherapy and supportive care. But anyway, the point is, how will it change management is a question that doesn't get asked enough, because not only is it a financial sink when you
Yeah.
are going to buy this new test or scan or whatever, but it's also opportunity costs, where
Yeah.
you can't relax, you can't lean into listening to your body and doing what's right for you because you're so anxious until you get the results of said test back,
Mhm.
as if it's going
Mhm.
to really
Mhm.
change things in a meaningful way. So, yeah, I hear you. I came to the same conclusions a long time ago. I believe that there are definitely some tests which are helpful. I mean, obviously, there are tests that are helpful that you have to do. But
Yeah.
I do also see that sometimes doing the test to help with the patient's anxiety can be part of the therapeutic model. You just don't want to be relying on that. You want to be honest with the patient. You want to look out for the patient's psycho-emotional needs by letting them know, hey, if you need this test done to reassure you about XYZ, we will do it. We will. But don't pin your hopes on it, because actually the work is going to be in insert lifestyle advice usually, or something like that. So it's about making sure that from a clinical perspective, that you don't become so lazy in your practice that you rely only on test results and scans before you move on a patient. And both sides of the coin, I'm seeing younger and younger doctors coming through who over rely on test results, and they're not looking, listening, and hearing the patient in front of them. And the other thing that I have been talking about a lot more recently is that I am seeing actually that s- there are some patients who actually seem to not have any interoceptive capacity or capability, so they can't feel into themselves. So there's a now something that we have to do before that, and it's about helping them learn to feel into themselves, the somatic work, the brain heart coherence, the releasing trauma, the trusting their body, the letting go of dissociative practices before they're able to get to that interoception. But we physicians do have a obligation to our patients to let them know that interoception, being able to feel into themselves, is something they have to try to develop. Cannot just rely on tests.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. I mean, as a yoga teacher, I talk about this every single day with, my students and members of the yoga community. Um, I feel it is a very sad consequence of the modern world that we live in. The, constant looking out at whatever is grabbing for our attention, in the attention economy. There's quite an inability for people to be with themselves. And it's a little bit scary to sit with yourself if you've never done that before, to be still. And a lot of times people will say to me, oh, I tried to meditate, but I'm not capable of doing that, or I couldn't slow my thoughts, or whatever the story may be, right? There's a million reasons why people struggle with meditation. But usually what I tell them, which by the way, that's not the only method or approach to develop interoception, right? It's one good one, but I also believe it's a very advanced technique in today's times, because if we're constantly overstimulated and we've literally never slowed down, we've never tuned into our breath, and we have no grid for how to do that, it's very difficult for somebody to go from like 1,000 miles an hour with 100 tabs open or more in their brain to slam on the brakes, stop, and shut all of that down. Right. So, how do you approach that with people that you observe have no grid for their own internal awareness? How do you coach them, teach them? Like, what can people do if they're like, okay, I'm listening to Dr. Olivia and I need to tune in? What do you tell them?
So the best thing is that there are 1,000 tools, but let me give you a few that I really like. One is that patients who don't know how to sit with themselves in silence. First of all, we've all been there, myself definitely included, right? And that's why meditation, like medicine, like yoga, is a practice. It's a meditation practice. You're never done, right? And for me, the number one reason why I started to embrace meditation, because I used to think it was too hard, not my thing, all that kind of stuff, is that I employed a lot more self compassion, where I realized that this practice of meditation, it is tough for many of us, and it's okay if I can't do it well, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll do just a calm app 12-minute daily meditation. And if I get 30 seconds of my mind being able to go clear, right? Nothing, no chatter. I call that a win. I'm like, oh, and I'm really
Huge.
quite proud of it. I'm really quite
Yeah.
proud of that. But with my patients, there is this thing that it doesn't matter what it is, but it's time bound. So people get anxious because they have what's called anticipatory anxiety, right? They don't know when something is going to end. So half their brain is wondering about, when is this going to end? When is this going to end? When is this going to end? And so when you time bound the practice of sitting with themselves, they're less likely to be anxious. So when you say, okay, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to get rid of your phone, because the fact that it's there means that you're more likely to pick it up, right? So the phone has to be, for some patients, in a completely different postcode, right? But it has to be away from you. Two, you're going to sit on a bench, look out onto something pleasant, the sea, a park, whatever it is. And we're going to have a little alarm, right? But we're going to time bound this, and you're going to sit with yourself for 6 minutes, 10 minutes. And because patients know that, okay, I only have to do this for 10 minutes or half an hour or whatever it is, in the beginning, you see they're just really quite uncomfortable. They're looking around, they're trying to stimulate their brain. But when the brain realizes we're not going anywhere, our phone's not anywhere close, you've only got another 8.5 minutes, you suddenly see their body stop fidgeting, and they just kind of drop a rung or two.
Mm.
Now, there are probably 100 rungs, it doesn't matter. But what we're looking for is the right trajectory, right? Are the patients moving in the direction they want to move in? And I've never done this myself, by the way, but I've heard that actually practice is to sit on a park bench for 4 hours by yourself. Can you do that? So I
I
like
think
to
you would
do
have to
little
build to
snacks
it,
and
right?
little bits. Exactly. And so, just if a minute is hard for you and you do a minute, that's great. So much self-compassion has to come into this, you know? But do yourself a favor and increase the odds that you're going to be successful. Get rid of that phone, make sure that you're dressed appropriately, make sure you got a cap if you're in a park, all these sorts of things. It also helps patients take control. If you've never meditated before, sitting to meditate can actually be quite a daunting task. So sometimes it's helpful. You know what? You do it however you want. If you're lying down in bed and you want to hit that meditation recording and just start there, do that. There is no right or wrong way to do it. Not all of us are going to be in Joe Dispenza's advanced meditation class, but you know what?
Right.
When you eventually get there, it is totally worth the journey that got you there.
It really is. I think
Mhm.
I never knew what peace was. And I think so many of us come from challenging backgrounds. And I'd love to pick your brain also on, because you already mentioned epigenetics, on like this idea of ancestral trauma. But I think more people than not, probably the large majority, and if I had to guess, it would be something like in the high 90 percentile of people, don't truly know what deep peace and contentment actually is. Because we've been born into a world that is so stressful, so toxic, so overstimulating, so fraught with conflict. We have way too much information. We shouldn't be processing this much at one time. That it's so miraculous if you can give that gift to yourself to develop a practice of peace, a practice of tuning in to tune out the noise and all the stories in your mind and all the stress and all the threats and all the worry and all the what if this and what if that and what if I get rejected or what if I don't have enough money or what if somebody doesn't like me or what if things fall apart and all of that, if you can take breaks from it, like mental vacations from it, it is the greatest gift that you could ever give yourself. But what I have experienced in my life is, and I've sort of come to this conclusion that part of my like dharma, my life's purpose, is to break the pattern that has been part of my lineage. And a lot of what I've experienced, I feel is not mine. Like it's this inherited pattern that I have to remind myself of sometimes that, like, hey, I didn't start this, but it stops with me. And that takes a lot of self responsibility. And like you said, a lot of self compassion and patience. A lot of people will ask me, well, how long is it going to take? Or I'm like, well, does it matter? Like, do you want the result or not? Like, are you committed? Are you willing to go there for yourself? So,
It
guys,
takes as
what are
long
your
as it
thoughts
takes.
on this? It takes as long as it takes, and you're either willing to do it or not. Because if you don't start now, then it's going to take longer. So you might as well just start. But I'd love your perspective on through the lens of psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology, through this scientific lens of how everything is connected. What has been your experience, whether through your patients or through the research, with ancestral trauma, with our family of origin, our identity, and how that shows up like in the nervous system and because I mean, there's the ACE score, right? We know that there's this massive study that was done with like 17,000 people that the higher your degree of adverse childhood experiences, the more likely you are to end up with chronic illness and suicide and incarceration and all these other things. So I personally see them, of course, as connected, but from a scientific perspective, what do you see?
I think what we'll do is we'll talk about various different studies and then people can pull it together themselves for sure. So the first one is the cherry blossom study. The cherry blossom study is where you had mice who were exposed to the smell of cherry blossoms and then they electrified the floor of the cage. So the mice, of course, conditioned to then associate the smell of cherry blossom with pain, such that after a while, you could pump in the smell of cherry blossoms and they would hide or retreat because they were anticipating pain. These mice had pups, and the pups did not interact with the original mice. And they too, despite not being exposed to the electrified floor when cherry blossom smell was pumped into their cage, they too hid or ran from the smell because they also anticipated pain, even though they'd never been part of that original experiment. The interesting thing here is that the grandpups of the original mice also would run or hide when the smell of cherry blossoms were pumped into their cage, even though they had never been part of that experiment and never interacted with their parents or their grandparents. That's apparently where this association ended because the great grandpups did not hide from the smell of cherry blossoms. So for mice, in this particular experiment, it was 3 generations. Another study is the famine studies, the Dutch famine study, China famine study, Swedish famine study. Basically, when a population go through a famine, epigenetic switches are turned off and on in their DNA such that not necessarily their children, but definitely their grandchildren have more propensity to obesity. The system doesn't want you to ever risk mortality, risk death if there's, heaven forbid, another famine and it's passed down through the genes. Another study that's really important to show is that, and we need to start talking as well about the nomenclature here. So we've got, or the semantics rather, we've got, intergenerational trauma and transgenerational, right? So intergenerational is handed one down to the next generation, to the next generation. Transgenerational is when you have experiences a trauma that can skip a generation, can not be expressed uh, in the intermediate generation. So the other studies that would be important to bring up here is that our whole lives are basically epigenetically, evolutionary wired for survival. And so a lot of what we're trying to strive for in this lifetime and our genes are trying to support that is one, survival, two, procreation. That's it. We all care about writing poetry and finding the love of your life and, being successful in entrepreneurship and all that. But that's, evolution doesn't give a shit about that, right? So the stress states of a woman while she's carrying a pregnancy gives your genes some idea of what that environment might be like, right? So when a woman is carrying a baby, if her cortisol levels are very high and she's saturating all the glucocorticoid receptors, not just in herself, but in her developing fetus, as you can imagine, cortisol and glucocorticoids can be quite detrimental because it changes your immune system as well, blah, blah, blah. So then if it's sustained enough, what happens is that those glucocorticoid receptors are downregulated. Okay. Then you're born and you have a lower density of glucocorticoid receptors than the next person who was born to a woman who didn't have chronic cortisol pulsing through her veins. Because you have a less density of glucocorticoid receptors, when there is a stressor and there's cortisol flying around, because you don't have as many receptors for the cortisol that's there, your ability to regulate your emotions, psychology, and behaviors in response to that physiologic stress, in response to that stress that produced that cortisol, is out of whack. So then this is what we have, anxiety and that kind of thing. Now, can we train our system? Of course we can. Nothing is set in stone pretty much, right? You and I are all about helping people, retrain their thresholds and, learn how to develop resilience and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But these are some things that we've seen in the literature that can explain how these things are transmitted intergenerationally or transgenerationally. But I absolutely believe and understand that this is incredibly important, and that is the electromagnetic potential of our system. The frequency of sounds, of emotions, of thoughts. I mean, when we sleep, if we go into deep sleep, that's slow wave sleep, that's delta waves. And the delta waves have certain physiologic manifestations. So it will open up aquaporin 4, for example, so your cerebral spinal fluid can wash through. Frequencies matter. Frequencies get
Mhm.
encoded in our system, right?
Mhm.
So when we have a shocking experience, your body wants to remember that because it wants to make sure that it doesn't get into the same problem again. That's going to help you survive. It's going to hopefully eventually help you to thrive such that you can procreate. But your body is going to figure out ways to not allow you to be in these shocking, detrimental, threat to life situations. It does get encoded in your cells, in your fascia, in your collagen, in your
Mhm.
energetics. Joe Dispenza talks about it kind of as well in your field. And just because we don't have the
Yes.
assays or the language or all the capabilities to really nut this out in a way that's palatable to the average conventional doctor doesn't mean it's not real. There is a lot of work that's being done by places like the HeartMath Institute, for example.
Yeah, we're connected to HeartMath. We're very blessed. So Bruce Cryer, who was the first guest on the podcast, was the CEO of HeartMath for like 11 years. And he's an advisor to Japa Health. Yeah, he's a Japa Health advisor and a dear, dear friend of mine. Yeah. So HeartMath and the work of HeartMath has been very inspirational to me, not just from an understanding like a conceptual, oh, that makes sense. But from an embodied, lived perspective, because, and, yoga gets a bad rep. So, I'll say it right here. A lot of people don't understand it. They don't know what it is. Um, I, obviously am an advocate for it. I own a yoga studio. I've owned yoga studios before. I teach yoga. I practice yoga. And when you get into that deep transcendental shavasana, this experience of deep rest at the end of a practice, after you've moved all the joints in their full range of motion, you've practiced rhythmic breathing and intentional focus for, maybe an hour. There's this experience of coherence that it's hard to explain to somebody unless they've actually felt it in their body, right? This experience of like the synchronization of all the energies in the body. There's this flow, there's this harmony, there's this deep peace. And it was that created that right there. Yeah, all the benefits are amazing, right? Developing capacity and tolerance for intensity, regulating my breath when I'm uncomfortable, building strength, stretching and realigning the tissues, and all of the, like you said, the piezoelectric properties of the fascia, and all of that is amazing, right? Super amazing. But where these supreme benefits came for me, for my healing, was within coherence. And I didn't have a grid for like, what is that in the beginning? Like, what do we call that? But now that I know what it is, I do my best to teach it to people and to inspire people to try and find ways to get there in their lives. Because I have found that when I am able to access that level of heart brain coherence, and I can actually feel and sense into my field, right? And there's that perception of subtle energy, that is when I can be acutely aware of, what are my beliefs? What am I carrying? Am I carrying stress that doesn't serve me? It's like your awareness of self and your environment expands. That's in where you have, at least in my experience, the opportunity to change, to shift, to show up differently, right? So I love that you're talking about this from the standpoint of like, okay, so if the question is, how does like trauma from our parents, grandparents, however long back affect us? Obviously, you described it very well through those studies. It does. But my experience has been we can alchemize that.
Oh, yeah.
Like we can tune into it and flip those switches,
Yeah.
right? So we could
Yeah,
talk about things
absolutely.
like mTOR and AMPK, right? And like really get into the nitty gritty of like what is happening in the mitochondria when we feel safe, when we feel peace. And how does that then create the health that we're all seeking?
Yeah. You know, it's funny because the way you talk, it's like you're the yoga version or the the non-medic version of what I do because so I recently developed a framework on how to approach any disease process, and it's called the 3C framework. Charge, coherence, capacity. Most practitioners, most doctors, we give patients drugs, supplements, diets, and modalities, assuming that they have the capacity for it, that they're able to uh, digest, absorb, metabolize, utilize, detox, and excrete. But many patients actually don't. So, what is going to increase your capacity? It's coherence. It's your brain heart coherence. It's your circadian rhythm. It's doing the things from an evolution perspective at the times you're meant to be doing those things. Because even the immune system, even your hormones, your cortisol levels, they all have diurnal variations. There's a time when it goes up and a time when it goes down. And so when we know that and we align that, and then we open up capacity, then we give the patients the drugs at the right time, it's going to be used, metabolized in the right way. But what feeds coherence? It's charge. It's your membrane potential. It's your voltage gradients. It's your electron capacity. It's your redox integrity. It's all these things that you get charged up with by the sun, by grounding, by people around you, by your interpersonal relationships and its relationship with source. It's your relationship with yourself. Like these things increase charge, right? To then improve and increase your bandwidth within your coherence, to increase congruence within yourself. And then that's going to open up your capacity for whatever it is that your doctor's trying to make you take.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think that we need more research in these topics in
Oh, yeah.
psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology, or
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that, do you think we need more research?
Oh,
And do you think
absolutely.
that that's an impediment in order for things to shift more in this direction? Do we have enough? Is there enough of an established base of science for it to become more mainstream?
100%. We've had enough research in the last, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The problem is the um, mainstream pharmaceutical industries and governments that are essentially beholden to. So the conversation doesn't open up. So people have no idea
Yeah.
about, and whoever controls the media controls the narrative. Social media has been very helpful, I think. The other problem, though, of course, it's a PR thing. This is a public relations thing. It's a marketing thing. The people who had first embraced psychoneuroimmunology, or people who had embraced the idea of fascia as a living, moving system, biophotons and light, electromagnetism. Some of them, of course, were maligned by powers that be for whatever reason. And some of them would the gauntlet was taken up by people who didn't have the credibility that would sway governments and uh, medics and people who essentially pull the strings when it comes to health
Yeah.
and medicine. So, like I said, it's a marketing thing. I
Incentives as well.
Of course. So, one of the things that I have tried to sort of walk a very fine line here. I don't know how well I've done it, but it's to maintain all my credibility markers. So my academic institution positions. So I'm a faculty lecturer with the Geneva College of Longevity Science. I'm a adjunct senior lecturer with the National Center for Neuroimmunology and Emerging Diseases in Australia. I have lectured at um, University of Southern California. I've lectured at Oxford. I make sure that I do all these things to make sure that when I say X, people listen and go, okay, she said X, as opposed to
Mhm.
them, ignoring what I have to say before I've even said what I want to say.
Yeah.
Making sure that when I'm on stage, that I look like, pencil skirt, high heels, whatever you want to say, but I look
Right.
like the people in the audience so that they see themselves in me. Okay, this is a doctor. She looks and sounds a lot like I do. She's using words like, mTOR and AMPK and,
Mhm.
all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But then, when I'm on my downtime, I'm in Ibiza with flowing robes. So,
Right.
you know,
Right. You're embracing the lifestyle that you know to be the highest for health, which doesn't look the part. And I struggle with that sometimes too, because Joppa Health is a venture-backed tech company, and that means that we've raised money from institutional investors, and it can be a little confusing for them when they see a CEO like me,
yeah,
where, I may be out here in the sun, and have very little clothes on and I'm barefoot. And
yeah,
what they're used to when they see a CEO pitch their project to them is very different optics.
yeah, exactly.
But my argument is always, hey, this is actually how I'm going to be more effective.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, I make sure that I publish sort of 2, 3 times a year. I've actually just finished a case study yesterday, and I had finished a review, a brief review about a week before that, to publish in peer-reviewed journals. Um, that's really important, to keep up,
Mhm.
in my case anyway, to keep up the credibility markers because the message that we're trying to get across is an important one. And we don't want it being lost simply because people don't like the vesicle uh, or
Yeah.
the vessel that is carrying the message, because we are talking about things like energy and frequency
Yes.
and light and grounding. And people, conventional doctors, patients who don't know, they they really push back for some reason. It's been demonized
And
that
prayer,
efficiently.
things
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Gratitude
I think,
practice. People roll their eyes.
yeah, yeah. I think my my thoughts on that is that it's like a Newtonian thing, you know? It's like this separation, reductionistic consciousness
Yeah,
that if you can't see it, like if you can't perceive it with your eyes, then it's irrelevant. That's the problem. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
It's a problem. Yeah, it is. But then, our ancestors were very tuned into that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So this is like a remembering, right? But then also converging it with the actual real science that, hey, this is effective,
Very
super
effective.
effective.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
very effective. So when you meet a patient that comes to you with complex chronic illness, how do you approach? I mean, do you have a method? Like you said, you have the three C's, but do you have a method to say, okay, we know what all the levers are that we can pull? And, you've talked a lot about like the coherence piece and how important that is. How do you inspire them to actually become this change and to actually embody, right? Because in my mind, in my experience, it requires like you have to change. There's a shift within the person
Yeah,
that has to happen.
absolutely, 100%. And so I was actually very lucky, and I'm pretty sure that this was source driven. But I was very lucky because earlier on in my career, I saw dramatic shifts in several of my patients, enough for me to realize, to know what's possible. And when you know what's
Mm.
possible, you expand out, and so then your lens changes. How I approach any patient is always to listen to them. By the time patients find me, they've been sick for about 10 plus years. They've seen about 10 plus patients. They've been on all the regimens twice. They've done all the tests twice. And
Yeah.
so it's about giving them space and time to listen. Because even in conventional medical school, they tell us that 80%, 90% of the time, the answer is in the history, which is why we have to be good history takers. And we have to hone this skill because not every patient is a good historian. So it's about
Mm.
trying to tease out what's important, what's not. And what we think is important may not necessarily be what the patient thinks is important. So not all patients are there to heal their disease. Some of them actually, their motivations are very different from what you think the motivations may be. Their goals can be very different from what you think their goals should be. Oh, you've got cancer. Of course you want to heal cancer. Well, actually, some people aren't looking that far ahead. They just want to be able to walk their daughter down the aisle tomorrow, right? Or next week or something like that. So the history taking, the speaking to the patients, that's the most important thing I would say. I am also very lucky. Okay. Um, Patients come to me of their own volition. They're not, I'm not the next doctor in the chain, essentially, So by the time patients come and see me and find me, they're ready for the kind of medicine that I'm providing,
Mm. Yeah.
which requires
Because I
them
was going to
to
ask you,
show up.
how do you overcome the idea? Because like I was told, so when I received okay, Hashimoto's was like one diagnosis, but there were many. You'll have this forever. It cannot be cured, right? So a lot of people have heard this, right? Over and over. I know you know this, right? So I was going to ask you, how do you overcome that limiting belief? But it sounds like by the time people come to you or the people that you attract already believe that healing is possible.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes patients come to me because they've heard that I'm someone who is striving to get them off medications. So they think that I have either a special medication in my back pocket, or that I have some special herbs or supplements that, that conventional doctors are hiding from them or whatever. But there is definitely some openness by the time patients find me. In fact, I used to have a immunologist who would refer his patients to me, and I had to ask him to stop because they were only seeing me because he told them to, and because these were Australian patients, they used to everything being free, right? Medicare. But that also meant that after many years of being in the medical desert, they were kind of waiting for salvation. They were waiting for the answer to come along and be gifted them from the government. So when
Mhm.
he referred them to me, they it's kind of acted like I had a pill, I had a prescription that he didn't have access to for some reason, and so these are not the patients that would benefit from me. So the first thing is always a history. Now, I have noticed that the biggest switch that happens in a patient that can push over lots of different dominoes is when they realize for real, okay? When they realize that their body isn't broken. Most patients who have a chronic illness, whether it's diabetes or neurodegeneration, they think their body's broken and they come to a doctor because they want to be fixed. And the drug is going to fix them or the surgery is going to fix them or whatever it is. But when you realize that the body is simply enacting certain scripts in response to particular threats, real or perceived, right? When you realize that and you're like, oh, my body's doing this because it thinks that it's going to help me by, oh, and you see it in these patients. And early on in my career, I was really, really lucky. I had one in particular. She'd been sick for 13 years or so. She was in her late 20s, early 30s at the time. This is many years ago. She was in the UK, I was in Australia. And the NHS were about to or wanted to cut out the remainder of her large intestine. They'd already gone in there and hacked out some of it. They wanted to cut out the remainder of her large intestine because she had colitis of unknown like cause, unknown reason. And blood, mucus, and she wasn't absorbing her food, and so she had all these vitamin deficiencies. But it wasn't Crohn's and it wasn't ulcerative colitis, but it was colitis of some form. And her boyfriend saw a personal trainer who had met me when he was in Australia, and that's the kind of it was so loose like that. So we had a chat, and again, it was just a history, right? But the history in her case was really important because it was like, well, when did you last feel well? And when she was a child, and she realized that there were her mother after issues with the father who had a secret family type thing. The mother would then
Mm.
try to use food as a control mechanism, with herself, with her family, with the kids, with my patient. And so food was always a bit of a thing, and then this and then that. And as we're going along, after a while, she did this herself, right? It wasn't something that I would want patients to do because I hadn't thought about it. But she would go, "Oh, good buddy, thank you, buddy, thank you for trying to help me." But like she did that to herself, and I'm not even joking you. Within 2 weeks, she could eat anything, and she has never looked back. She wound up getting pregnant,
Wow.
having a baby. She didn't get the surgery done. She's not had issues with her gut since. It was, to be fair, it was one of only two where I've seen a huge transformation in the ridiculously short period of time.
And that's simply because, like, her relationship to herself and her story changed?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the gastrointestinal tract is one of your biggest, apart from your skin and your lungs, is one of the biggest um, guardian sites. So, a guardian site is a part of your body where if your integrity was going to be breached by a bacteria, parasite, or virus, which is one of the main reasons why you got taken out of the gene pool back in the day, it
Mhm.
those threats would usually come through your mouth, stomach, gastrointestinal tract, your nose, your lungs, or your skin if the skin was broken, right? So these guardian sites have got a interesting mix of white blood cells, so protector cells, such that they are going to degranulate these bioactive molecules, which can cause itch and vasodilation and all these different things in an attempt to protect you. Now, if your system is high in cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine, your system is going to be looking for that breach because it's going to assume, okay, it's probably a virus, bacteria, parasite, saber-tooth tiger, winter famine, like one of the usual things that would take us out from the gene pool, right? It doesn't understand lost car keys and deadlines at work, okay, especially when it's so persistent.
Yeah. Right.
And so, in an attempt to protect you preemptively, it will already start to make your respiratory tract a little bit more twitchy. So you get asthma, or you get like tightness in the chest, for example, or you get excess mucus in your nose. It will automatically increase gastric acid production in your stomach, just in case it's coming in through your food or your water and it's going to kill whatever it may be. And so in her case, she was on high alert, right? Her system thought that there was a threat because she was always concerned. And that's why patients can get themselves in loops, right? And with her, she just jumped off the loop. She was like, my body is not broken. I'm not inherently sick and broken. I am okay. My body is trying to protect me. And so her body just went, oh, I guess now that her nervous system has calmed down and she isn't producing all this cortisol and epinephrine, I guess the saber-tooth tiger isn't here anymore. And it just kind of started to heal and repair. That was it.
I wish more people knew about stories of possibility like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? You should probably you should probably interview her. She's very she's she is now complete, like, because I always say as well, like, I didn't heal this patient. I just
Of course.
listened to her and she healed herself. And since then she has, honestly, she can spot where people's behaviors and mindsets and psychology and emotions are causing their physiological symptoms, their physical symptoms, um, just with their threat detection systems, with how they're perceiving threat, real or like I said, real or perceived. It's incredible. So if she didn't have the baby, she'd probably be going down the road of like some sort of health coach. She had such a
Yeah.
profound change.
She's got that like medical intuition now, you know? It's
Mm.
like you can, once you see the pattern, you can't really unsee it.
That's
It
exactly
becomes
it.
so clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. It becomes so clear. Yeah. So when you have these patients that have that pattern that you can see, but they cannot see it, how do you help them see it? So how can people who are listening, do you think, best evaluate their own blind spots in that way? If there's things about themselves that they're carrying that are interfering with their health and contributing to their chronic illness, what would you say?
Yeah. So in my practice, I actually always listen to the story and I always tell them, and it's the truth. I always say to them, wow, I'm listening to your story, and all I can think is that your body is working beautifully. And they don't usually hear that about their body. They usually hear that they're broken, that they need this
Mhm.
fix, that they need a
Yeah.
drug, whatever. And your body's working beautifully. So let's figure out what it's trying to say. And you go through all the different symptoms, and so proficient in this now. I can go through every symptom and explain to them why their body has decided to do this symptom and what it's trying to achieve. And it really doesn't matter what it is, whether it's migraine or vertigo or an itch or polycystic ovarian syndrome. It really doesn't matter what it is. When you have the lens, and a curious lens, and you understand a little bit of evolutionary biology, you can start to see how every symptom that you carry can be an attempt by your body to protect you. Hashimoto's is a fantastic example, right? So the thyroid is one of the brakes on metabolism. It is one of the ways that your body is trying to look after you. And by look after you, we mean it's like, okay, there's a lot going on. She's doing a shitload of work and she's looking after these people and she's not looking after herself. But you know what she needs? She needs a break. We're going to help give her a break. So we're going to drop
Yeah.
her we're going to drop her thyroid production, and she's going to be really tired. And hopefully she's going to go into the cave, and the cave is the
Yeah.
safest place for her, right? And then of
Yep.
course, what do we do instead? We push through. We push through, push through,
Push
push
harder.
through.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
push
Yeah.
harder.
Mm.
And then it's like,
Yep.
oh, well, I'm just going to do more of this, right? And then we patch that by taking exogenous, thyroxine. We take a medication. And so here your body is trying to get you to repair, regenerate, rejuvenate, relax. Because when you see someone push, 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 you can bet your bottom dollar that there is a lot of regeneration and repair that's not happening. And at some
Yep.
point, you have to repay that debt. You either repay it now,
Stop calling me out. Stop calling me out.
you either repay that debt now or you repay it later with interest. And your body doesn't like
Mhm.
repaying debts with interest because interest is expensive. And metabolic
Yeah.
processes are they're expensive. So
Yes.
we then patch patients with thyroxine. Then they push through and they're on thyroxine, and their body still isn't repaying that debt. Their body still isn't increasing the bandwidth of
Mhm.
reserves, and they crash and burn. And so, yeah, it's a lot of these patients, inverted commas, they have this for life because we didn't address why this was ongoing in the first place, and we got these patients stuck in a loop. I know I
Yeah.
don't believe that bullshit at all. I know plenty of patients who have recovered from Hashimoto's, and any doctor who's
Oh,
still
yeah.
yeah, any doctor that's still spouting that it's a lifelong disease doesn't hasn't read the literature. That's complete. Well, it's like
Right.
CFS. It's like chronic
Right.
fatigue syndrome, right? Just because you
Mhm.
haven't seen someone recover from CFS or from Hashimoto's doesn't mean that it's not possible. Because if you actually went out there and you actually ask questions, you'll know hundred, tens of thousands of patients who have recovered from all these so-called non-recoverable illnesses.
Yeah.
uh, all you're doing is putting constraints around patients. You are yoking their psychology and their emotions to a prognosis that you have made up.
Well, and it really removes the power from the individual,
Yes.
right? It's like it's so disempowering to say there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
You're stuck
Yeah.
like this. I
Yeah.
hate that. But
Right.
I'll also say that as much as you can heal, you can actually make yourself sick again. So, and I've done this. I've
Absolutely.
totally done this. And so this goes back to like the patterning, right? So it's very important to like stay committed because you can fall right back into those same cycles of pushing too hard, not prioritizing your sleep. The ability to heal is there, but the ability to get sick again is also there too.
Yeah, yeah, and the system kind of works in a, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of way. In other words, the threshold for activation of whatever process, like Hashimoto's, for example, is actually slightly lower because your body doesn't want to miss a trick. It's like, I'm so sorry
Yeah.
that, all these threats before we tried to get you in a cave, we're going to, we're going to activate, get into cave mode for Cheryl with slightly less threats just so that we don't.
Sooner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sooner. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that. I feel that. And I feel for myself and also for other people that have experienced chronic illness, autoimmune disease, these kinds of things, you have to really take care of yourself.
Yeah.
You really do. You can't, yeah, yeah, you can't take it for granted. And I've done that to myself before. So I know that, you know, you can't slack off, essentially. It's a lifelong commitment to these practices. Um, so let's see. So, there's all this talk about, like you mentioned, gut health. And then, of course, toxins, and then things like glyphosate and what they're spraying in the air and, diet. There's all these other what you call levers, right? All these other things. And to me, they all matter. And in my experience, the number one thing has always been safety for me. Like always, always, always safety first, and then environment and coherence, kind of in parallel. But if I don't feel safe, it doesn't matter how much my circadian rhythm is on point, right? The safety will always crumble everything. How much in your practice have you seen things other than safety and coherence with the environment really matter? Because you see things like parasite cleanses and there's all these other things that are talked about. I mean, I've seen so much and some really sophisticated content. that obviously has put, a lot of research into it around things like, iron handling and, there's all this stuff on social media that you see about all these rabbit holes that you can go down in order to try and like solve the puzzle for yourself. So if somebody's trying to solve their puzzle and it's overwhelming, what would you say to them in terms of like the likelihood that it's all these other things?
Okay. As you know, I'm here in Cancun. And I'm in Cancun because my friend, one of my best friends, she's my age, so she's 47. She was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer when she was 39. And in Australia, when your prognosis is less than 12 months, they pay out your life insurance. As a single mother to a young girl at the time, she was like, well, I can't die. That's not an option. So she took the money. Yeah. And she came to Cancun to Hope for Cancer, which is an alternative cancer place here. And she rolled up her sleeves and she did the work and she went into remission after 11 months. Now, I have come with her to Cancun almost every year since then for her top up, in January. And I've become quite friendly with the doctors at the clinic. I've done a speaking tour with the main doctor, Dr. Tony, in Japan and Thailand, for example. Like I'm very friendly with them, and I'm here to learn as well. And there is something that almost all alternative slash complementary integrative oncologists will tell you is that generally speaking, they can pick the patients who aren't going to do that well. Now, whether we can pick the patients who are going to do well, that's a different story. Okay? This is not two sides of the same coin. But we can,
Mhm.
generally speaking, pick the patients who aren't going to do well. It's by their posture, the language, the energy that they're carrying. And if we all try to articulate what exactly it is that we're looking at, looking for, perceiving,
Mhm.
it's this lack of hope, lack of belief. They've given up. These are also the patients who cannot lean into their treatments. These are the patients who, they see this doctor and then they get a program and then they're like, go see another doctor, get another program, and then go see a third doctor, get another program, and then they're playing off the doctors against each other, and then you know, they're trying to combine all three programs, and then they see a fourth program, and then they're constantly on Instagram and Google, and they look up a new thing, and they're like, what about this, and what about that, and well, should I add this to my program? They never lean into their program. They never drop into their program. They never surrender. Those are also the
Mhm.
patients who don't do well. Now, when I say don't do well, I don't want people to think, oh, they die. Like there's a big spectrum of not doing well here. But very rarely, in fact, every integrative oncologist that I have met will say, yeah, it is that way. It is the case that you can pick these patients who don't do quite well. So, I guess we can kind of transpose that, like what's necessary in this in the soup that is going to buoy you, the soup that's going to see you across the line. What is it? It's I don't know what the magic combination is, but I know what it's not. And your mindset, your energy, your beliefs, your hope, your social circles, they all matter. I used to be someone who was, okay, we're going to do a parasite cleanse and we're going to do this diet. And we're going to, I used to also have all these different programs. And don't get me wrong, I still have all these protocols and programs that I run with patients. And I'm grateful for every single patient who was the perfect candidate for a particular protocol, did it and got nowhere because it was another lesson for me,
Mhm.
right? Because you can get very comfortable going, oh, I've seen this patient, this type of patient 1,000 times, and I know this protocol that's going to work because it's worked for the last 1,000 patients. And for whatever reason, this particular patient it doesn't work. And then it reminds you, you know what? Everybody is unique. And there are things about every patient that you just don't quite know whether or not it's going to be the deciding factor on whether or not a protocol works. And then you start to really pare it back and pare it back and simplify it and simplify it. And all the things that are going to move the needle in the right way tend to be the free stuff. It tends to it tends
Free
to
stuff.
be the free stuff, right? It tends to be your
Yeah.
mindset and your self-compassion and how willing you are to surrender and lean in, your interaction with
Yeah,
nature.
that's not to say that you can eat McDonald's every day and
Of
just
course
say,
not. Yeah.
I believe that I am, healed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, all those things to me are like table stakes, but I'm glad that you confirm that because it's the unseen. That's what the energy that you carry. It's like what's in your heart, that I feel like makes the biggest difference with everything. And that's not even just to say health. I believe that that's manifestation and relationships and your purpose and all the things that make life good, like all the things that make life fulfilling. It's this really interesting mirror for me of like in order to have the health, you have to have the awareness. And then in order to have the awareness, you have to have the health. And in order to have the awareness, it's all this sort of this this fractal of itself that builds
Yes.
upon right itself. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, sort of this interesting dynamic. So what do you think? I mean, we talked about research. Like what do you think the research is that should be done like next? And what do you think is the change that we need to see in this space in order for this to become more normalized and this to become more common for people to understand it better, accept it more.
I really like the research of Alia Crum and her predecessor, her professor, Ellen Langer. So they're responsible for a lot of very cool studies that are headline grabbing studies, that the New York Post would post about. And it gets into the
Yeah.
mainstream because of how innovative or quirky their studies are. So they were the ones who were responsible, or Alia was responsible for that study, I think, about the chambermaids in New York hotel. Half of them
I
were
haven't heard
told
this one.
Oh, yeah. So half of them were told that their work counted as exercise if you were to go off the Surgeon General's advice. And then the other
Uh-huh.
half of the chambermaids weren't told anything. And the chambermaids who believed that their work counted as exercise lost more weight, decreased their waist size, increased their cardiovascular fitness, all that kind of stuff, simply because they believed now that they weren't just working, that they were exercising. They're still doing the exact same things. Um,
Yeah.
the kind of studies are things like there's a special ingredient study where I think they put vinegar in beer. But if you tout it as a special ingredient, people say that it tastes better because their mind is that
Mm.
powerful. It's all the placebo, nocebo studies, which are
Yeah.
really
That's what I'm
interesting.
thinking.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kinds of studies where not only do we show placebo, nocebo, but we actually show the biochemical and bioelectromagnetism around those things. Because now we have more and more assays and more ability to show bioelectrics. Just like biophoton research, right? You have a very dark room, you got a photo multiplier, you got a very sensitive camera, and you can show biophoton emissions. So we now have more and more capability to crunch the data, to tease out these aspects which we hadn't previously done. AI and machine learning are going to be very helpful for this. There is actually a group out of Croatia called ANI, Neuroimmunology. They've had funding as well. They are incredible. They use large amounts of data. They're churning it through the AI and machine learning, and they are if I'm not mistaken, they are the only company that is in two categories of the X Prizes finalists. So the health span X
Oh,
Prize and the is it muscular dystrophy X Prize, like a kind of like an orphan disease type X
interesting.
Prize. hmm But so I
I'll have
was
to look them up.
Yes, ANI and ANI Biome, right? And I love them. I'm an advisor. And the reason why I love them so much is because they are exactly like us. they understand about emotions and mindset and psychology and spirituality and source and all the rest of it. But they also know that to get all these sorts of things across the line, you need data. You need hard facts, you need hard science. And so that's why they're churning shitloads of data with proteomics, lipidomics, metabolomics, epigenetics, because they're trying to find signals. And
Yeah, interesting. So that's been one of my interests for a while. So you haven't taken the job assessment, but I'll send it to you. So we have a scoring algorithm that we built. It's a proprietary scoring algorithm, and then a suggestion engine that we built that matches lifestyle interventions, most of them free, right, with the most optimal for each individual, depending on the way that they've answered this question. So if they can't meet with Dr. Olivia, who can sit and hold space and listen, they can take the JAPA assessment and that will give them some sense of like their story, right? And so we produce a report with scores and a roadmap of suggestions, and it's prioritized based on those scores, and then they can reassess, and this all is all going to evolve. So we also have our own, machine learning algorithm that we built around this. So one of my long-term goals is to be able to quantify actually this starting point that people enter into our ecosystem from, where they self-report how they're feeling, they declare if they've been diagnosed with any conditions, they also have the opportunity to say what they're interested in. So these things matter to us as well, right? Not only like what are your symptoms, what are your conditions if you have any diagnoses, but what are your interests? Like who are you? What's all your history? How many bowel movements do you have a day? Like what kind of meat do you eat? If you eat fish, all these things, right? Do you resent your parents? Like all these questions. And then if we're able to take people along this journey, we also offer blood tests as well. Then we can import other data sets and we can quantify, like truly measure the results that people experience by going through this Japa journey and this lifestyle so that we can prove unequivocally that there is real world evidence that the application of this creates results and we have the data to back it up. So that's one of my long-term goals as well.
that's awesome. Yeah, exactly. So these are the kinds of studies that are needed, right? And I'm very hopeful that, well, let's put it this way. I'm sure you've also been in a room with 60 CEOs or C-suite executives. And in 2025, 2026, of those 60 C-suite executives interested in personal growth and development, at least half of them have been in ayahuasca ceremony
Yeah.
or spoken to source. And so how they are thinking about things, what they're investing in, how you know the interests of the industries in general, it's shifting, I think.
Yeah. It's shifting. I would like to see it shift faster, but you're right, it is shifting. These are like our people, right? These are the people that I feel like there's a straddle that's happening in both worlds, right? So there's like this straddle happening in sort of the conventional centralized architecture, but there's also this awareness and this foothold taking place in this parallel world, this parallel system where we're very clear that there needs to be a shift and we're kind of building it in parallel, right? Instead of trying to fix it, it's being built separately, right? And it takes quite a bit of courage and grit and tenacity to do both. And then of course to do it and not burn out is a whole other conversation, you know? To go into the cave every once in a while and rest and relax. I'm still working on that balance. But I think these are really important conversations for people to understand that this is the trajectory of health and medicine, that there are very, very special, powerful, wise, embodied doctors like you that are out there that have a different perspective, that operate from a different framework, and that they believe healing is inherently possible and that the body's not making mistakes. So I think these kinds of conversations, the more we share, the more we amplify, each other's voices and collaborate and talk about it, the more the velocity will increase
Yeah.
in this direction. And the more people will sort of reject what hasn't been working and open their minds more to a different way of being, a different way of even like when you interview your doctor, it's like there should be some kind of a awareness that like, hey, there's different kinds of doctors, and knowing what questions to ask your doctor.
Yeah.
So
And knowing
that
that you can
is it a
fire your doctor as well.
yeah. you can fire your doctor, and if like for me, what happened is like I just listened initially. I did exactly what the doctor said. It was, this very conventional, by the way, this was also, pre-social media. This was in, gosh, when I received my diagnosis for Hashimoto's, I was 25 years old. It was 2005. So this was like, before really the age of information really exploded. But for the first couple of years, I just took the Synthroid and, everything else that was recommended to me, and went in for the follow-up visits where we, measured TSH, and that's probably all we measured. And then we increased the Synthroid, But after a while, when I didn't get better, there was something inside of me that refused to settle for that life of sort of medication management and symptom management that really wasn't getting any better. So I feel like there was a fire in me or something that just refused to settle. But my message to people is never settle. Never ever settle. Like, you deserve everything. Your birthright is to feel good, to have abundant energy, to have amazing cognition, and to be able to live your purpose
Yep.
and not just settle for like this, this shit life where you're in a rat race and you never really have energy, and you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you can, if your doctor doesn't see that for you,
Yeah.
if your doctor doesn't want the best for you, yeah, fire your doctor 100%.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're a really special gift. I'm really grateful for the time that you spent, and you are. And whenever I have the opportunity to entangle with people like you, it lights me up and it inspires me a lot. It gives me a lot of hope in the world that, there's really good-hearted, special people that are gifted and that care deeply about making change and helping people. So thank you for all the work that you do. And your humility is also really impressive. I really appreciate that as well. You're actively seeing patients, right? Like, people can find you and meet with you if they have complex chronic illness or, mystery symptoms or things that they can't resolve on their own.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And how do they go about doing that?
So my website is a good place to start, www.drolivialeslar.com. So that's Olivia Lesslar.com. And majority of because my registration, my medical registration is from Australia, in Australia. I sort of do more medical consults, in inverted commas, in Australia or via Zoom with Australian patients. But I do consults with patients around the world. I just don't call them medical consults; they're wellness consults.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing because I don't prescribe medications by and large, and I really do try to work with the patient to try and figure out the next best courses of action, right? Because there are options, and I actually write the letter for their physician, so they have to have a physician
Mm.
before they see me because I am okay. So in medical school, we were told if you hear hooves, look for horses.
Okay.
The only thing is, when I was working, after a while, I was very good at looking for zebras. So, in other words, I am a professional zebra hunter now. I can pick up things that my conventional colleagues probably will miss. But what that means as well is that I will miss the conventional stuff because I don't practice looking for horses anymore. So they have to have a physician, and they have to have been investigated as per local guidelines because I'm here to look for the mystery stuff.
I
Most of
see. I see. So
Yeah.
that's like a prerequisite for people to work with you, that they're already working with a
Yes.
physician.
Yeah, uh, because I'm mostly doing complex chronic conditions and mystery illnesses with a psychoneuroimmunology, quantum medicine, and evolutionary lens. I am basically an expert second opinion. So I don't, generally speaking, see patients more than 3 times. I don't become a PCP. I'm not a primary care physician. When you have a medication, you're on medication for these diseases, and you want to get off those medications, that I'm the person to see as well. But if I can't figure out what's wrong with you within 3 consults, then it's not in my repertoire somewhere. Like, and there's a moratorium then. So it's about 10, 11 months. You can come back to see me if you still haven't found an answer, because I go to sort of 25 to 30 conferences a year. I do a lot of research. Like I say, I write papers. I interact with a lot of professors and scientists because I'm constantly trying to expand my knowledge outside the conventional framework. So if I don't know the answer this year, I might know it next year, but I don't need patients paying for my Google searches. So if I can't
Right.
figure it out within 3 consults, um, yeah, I tell patients not to see me anymore.
Oh, that's so high integrity of you.
Oh,
Um, because you don't see that you don't see that very often, right? There's like this sort of like rape and pillage sort of model out there, just keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back. It's like the hope that they get you, you know what I mean? So I have another question actually that I was just thinking about when you were talking about all this research that you're constantly doing. What has been, I mean, I don't know if you have like a number one or top three, like most fascinating things that you have discovered in the crosstalk between the nervous system and the psyche and the immune system and the hormones. Like, do you have like a couple things that you're like, these are the most like fascinating
I
that you
do.
found?
I do, and this is more recency than anything because
Yeah,
I
I love
love things
that.
that I'm working on at the moment. Um, so one of them is about avoidant behavior, avoidant behaviors, behaviorisms, and neurocognition. Now they are sit in very different frames, but there are a couple of linkages in between which I am currently investigating and reviewing. But essentially, we usually think of a behavior as being the outward expression of psychology or mindset or emotions. In children, however, behaviors are what's rewarded or punished because very often we cannot understand the inner workings of a child, their intentions. So we will punish what we can see or reward what we can see. Now,
Mhm.
after a while, if this is quite a tight paradigm in a particular household for a child, where a particular behavior is the one that's required to live peacefully in that home, then your psychology and your emotions actually have to shift to be internally congruent with that behavior to reduce friction in your personhood. When
So
you
you become it essentially?
pretty much, right, you fake it till you make it type thing. So you become those behaviors, or rather, there's alignment. Let's call it that. There's alignment of your psychology and emotions with those particular behaviors. Now, as you know, as most people know, when you think certain thoughts or you think in certain ways, you use certain tracks in your brain and you can change neural architecture.
Mhm.
Now, neural architecture is going to have something to say about energetic choke points, how information flows in particular ways, how much blood flow there is to certain parts of the brain, that kind of thing. So it's not a huge leap or jump to think about certain behaviors which can lead to, and it's this big process, multi-process here, but can lead to um, neurocognitive vulnerabilities, shall we say. So that's one of the things that I'm currently working on. Another thing that
So how do you define the neurocognitive vulnerability? So for like someone that might be listening to this, what is that to them?
cognitive fatigue, periods of time where you don't multitask as well as you could or should, changes to your sense of humor, no matter how subtle, um, just your brain not functioning in as optimized a state as it could. I'm
Mhm.
purposely using very vague language here because
Yeah.
there are this is such a nuanced conversation that it would be very easy for someone to accidentally hear something which I'm not saying, and then it turns into like me not being able to get a paper published. Um, the other thing that
I
I
see.
was seeing in patients actually was where I had this very unique case of this woman who had a recurrent adult childhood-long recurrent vaginal yeast infections. And she would come to the same clinic because I was working in a regional area, and I was the next registrar coming through, and so the head doctor would pass on this patient to the new registrar coming through, hoping that maybe this different interaction would help that, because this woman was on like constant medications for her vaginal yeast, right? And I saw her, and she was a lovely woman, very, very obese, which had probably also something to do with that. Um, and anyway, I obviously went off the algorithm, and the algorithm didn't work, and now that was the end of it. I didn't have any more tools in my toolbox at that stage. Many years later, after I knew far more about the ACEs, when I started
Mhm.
to think more about what is your body trying to do to help you, to protect you, and it will sometimes use bacteria or yeasts or viruses in an attempt to help you, right? In any way. I met up with the supervisor, the GP supervisor, and I asked about her, and he said, "Oh, she moved to a different town." I said, "Oh," she goes, "Oh yeah, because of what happened with her stepfather." Uh, I don't no, I didn't, and I hadn't picked that up, right? Because this is not a question I was asking when I was a junior doctor, and she had been abused by her stepfather as a child, and it's not the first time that I've seen women who will put on a lot of weight as their body's protection, against an abuse, for example. There should be a trigger warning for this. Could you do a trigger warning for this?
Yeah. Yeah, I will.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and yeast infection is another way that your body. I don't want to make this a statement across the entire board, right? There's a lot of nuance in what I do. And I want to preface this with the fact that there are nuances, but in this particular case, and I have seen other cases where your body utilizes the yeast that has earned its place as your vagina as its home, right? It's earned its place from an evolution perspective somehow. And your body will say to the yeast, hey, we need to increase inflammation a little bit to help with repair, because inflammation in the short term is reparative, right? We need to help with repair, or um, you know, uh, inflammation is something that your body's going to turn on as a just in case against a threat, real or perceived, whatever that threat may be. Inflammation can sometimes be utilized by your body. And so it was the first time that I saw yeast. And since then, I've also seen bacteria, I've seen viruses, and I've seen, other things co-opted by your body in an attempt to protect you, to help you. I guess this is
From
like
from an emotional so from some kind of trauma.
from some sort of threat.
Right,
So
yes.
yeah, so in this case, because of what had been happening, it feels like this. I mean, with her, I never got to see her again, but I've seen it in other patients since then, which is why I asked. I was able to put it together so quickly. Um, I've seen patients who, when they don't like their bodies, when something has happened, when their integrity has been breached, when there wasn't consent, when all these sorts of things, the body is going to turn on inflammation in an attempt to protect them, to repair them, um, and the body sometimes uses, you know, the resident microbiome to help with that increase in inflammation. You asked before how I got to where I am, like what happened in my medical practice, and I'd forgotten to say then, but I still remember there was I was working at a immunology allergy clinic, and the boss had a 19-year-old girl come through because she has mast cell activation and off the back of IBD, so inflammatory bowel disease. And I'm not even sure why he pushed her in with me, but he said, "I don't know why. Could you just maybe talk to her a little bit?" I'm not even. I cannot even remember why he did that. Maybe he thought that I could help her with diet or something. And I still remember we're having a bit of a chat, and it really wasn't that. long into our discussion where I had this intuition to ask her if there had been some sort of sexual assault, uh, or something along those lines, in the 6 to 12 months before her inflammatory bowel disease diagnosis. And there had been. About 6 months before her diagnosis, she was walking through campus in the evening, and she was assaulted.
Had she not shared that with anybody? So
No.
she was carrying that?
Yeah, because she didn't realize it was linked. To be fair, I didn't realize it was linked back then. She didn't realize it was
Yeah.
linked, so she didn't think that it was worth just telling her doctors. Um,
Right.
But then, look, this is, we're going down a very big, we're opening a very big can of worms at the moment towards the end of the
Yeah.
podcast. But, ever since then, if you Google the kind of research that ACEs, so the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, has with regards to all manner, right?
Yeah.
IBS, arthritis, cancer, female gynecological issues. I mean, there's so much there to
So
in it,
much.
so much. And if you look at it from the perspective of, okay, what did this threat, what did this threat say to your body such that your body is now turning on this response in an attempt to protect you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you start to see all sorts of answers to questions that you thought there weren't any answers to. So a lot of these kinds of things are some of the research questions that I ask. Everybody, of course, unanimously says, okay, HPV is bad. In your cervix, it's going to cause cancer. This, that. And I'm not saying that that's not right. But what I'm saying is that there are other angles to be explored as well.
Yeah. From the lens of the mind body medicine of the psycho neuro like everything is connected, and how does an experience in one realm send a signal and this cascade of dominoes that falls in the other. So I was on a podcast recently, Coach's Corner, and it was the first time ever that I got like really vulnerable about something that had happened to me. Um, in regards to like my trauma, my story, um, and so much of it. And I won't go into details here, but so much of it was, and you mentioned just a second ago, um, some kind of like conflict. You hate your body, right? Some kind of like conflict with yourself, some kind of like adversity. And how many women do we know that can go through their lives? Probably men too, although I've never been in a man's body, so I don't know what that would be like. But I'm guessing they have their own version of it, go through their whole lives escaping some kind of body image issues. Like I don't know anybody, right? Like so and the degree of that is usually pretty bad. Like most people I know struggle to make peace with this, like, okay, we have this avatar that we live with, that we live in this vessel. Um that I'm so glad you mentioned that. That perceived threat of being at war with yourself, of not feeling safe within yourself, to me has been something very huge to make peace with in order to be healthy. Um, and to really love, deeply appreciate the gift that it is to have a body and all of the miraculous things that your body can do. And that to me is, I wish I could just give that to people, like put it in a bottle. And I know you have to earn it, and that the gift and the benefit of the gift comes from earning it, like going through the journey yourself and facing your shadows and facing your demons and alchemizing it and developing, flexing that muscle of like being your higher self, right? And not letting that small voice take over. But this is a really important conversation, and self-love and your emotions and how that affects your health, even down to your vaginal yeast infection, which I also experienced. Chronic bladder infections. Like I had surgery for interstitial cystitis when I was like 21 years old. I had chronic UTIs. I had chronic yeast and BV. Like, I mean, I had all of these things. So it really speaks to me that you're saying these things, because it wasn't until I made peace. Yeah, the other things I talk about, like you got to eat your diet right, all the things, right? Reduce your toxic load. But it wasn't until I really made peace that my health radically improved and all that stuff resolved. So thank you once again for, being so wise about these things and helping to guide people that, are lost and need help. And for those willing to face their shadows and, willing to do the work, it's such a gift. It's such a gift. So thank you for using your voice, especially in a world that, like you said, they push back,
Yeah.
and they probably sometimes push back hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I know that's not always easy.
Thanks, Cheryl. I really appreciate this time as well to chat about all these things. And I love PNI, I love psychoneuroimmunology. So to meet someone as enthused about it as I am, it's a real pleasure.
Yeah, and I would love to see more people understand it. So thank you for sharing all about it. I'd love to have you back on sometime, maybe when you feel like you've got some like new nuggets of information through your research. We could talk
Sure.
about whatever it is that you're studying and discovering. So let's stay close and be well. I'll make sure to link in the notes like how people can find you. So if they're interested in working with you, they can go ahead and look you up and reach out that way.
Perfect. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Dr. Olivia. You're amazing.
Yay. Okay. All right. See ya. Bye.